Okay. And welcome back. What would you like to talk about?
Can we talk about transmission?
Yes.
Transmission is the alignment of circumstance resulting in revelation. It has nothing to do with anything in particular. What the circumstances are that align is arbitrary. It could be anything. It's impossible for you to get anything from outside. Since you are everything, there's no outside for you to get anything from. As I talked about this morning rather exhaustively, it's a mistake to relate to your experience in terms of circumstances that seem to be occurring. Because all circumstances that seem to be occurring are interpretations that exist all in your imagination and are inaccurate.
Is there an unreality?
No.
No room
Plenty of room for it.
for
There's no such thing.
Mm.
For any unreality to exist, it would have to be made a reality in order to exist. In a profound sense, everything that exists is unreality that exists because reality exists. But there's no point trying to make any sense of that because no sense can be made.
Back to the transmission thing, it's impossible to get anything from outside, and yet there does seem to be a resonance or inspiration, or insight that's given from association with others.
Sure. Sure, but that resonance is just that, it's a resonance. And all resonance is between actuality with itself. There being no second principle to relate to. All seeming progression of events or seeming progress or seeming development is just that seeming. It happens to look like that, but you can't get to the bottom of what it actually is because, as we talked about at great length this morning, it cannot be accurately captured in terms of conceptualization or in terms of analysis. So what occurs is always actuality itself, and you can't say what it is or how it is. It's the all occurrence is simply the participation with actuality. The point is, in terms of yoga, engage with your experience intelligently, which means find value. And don't worry about how you're finding value or where you're finding value or whether or not it seems to be oriented to circumstances or not. Just find value. And as you become more skillful at finding value, you'll be able to find value more and more ubiquitously. Because in fact, there's nothing but supreme value, period, and everywhere. But any place you do find value is a revelation of value. So value is wonderful. So if you seem to find value in certain circumstances, by all means have at it. But don't make the mistake of assuming that the circumstances themselves are necessary. It's just an accident. It happens to be the case that it seems to look like that, but it's not actually essential. Nothing depends on circumstances. Circumstances have no importance whatsoever. But in practical terms, as you seem to be engaging with circumstances, do so in your best interest. So go to value, go to revelation, go to wow factor, so on and so forth. But typically people have a lifelong history of orienting to things in terms of circumstances and trying to manipulate circumstances and trying to achieve more optimal circumstances and so on and so forth. And ultimately all of that gamesmanship doesn't lead anywhere. So for yoga, it's essential to penetrate through circumstance into true value. Which doesn't mean not to use circumstance if that seems useful or relevant, but don't stop there assuming that that's what's actually happening. So it's a matter of being opportunistic. Be opportunistic with your experience to find the value, to find revelation, but don't assume that anything that seems to occur in the course of that is actually necessarily necessary for that, even if it seems to have been the case in some instance.
Peter, is it typical for people to develop cities and powers and paranormal phenomena in the later stages of the yoga as their conceptual frameworks are seen through?
Yes, but what that actually means and what that actually looks like might not conform to expectations.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that question. Form cities?
Cities is a technical term which means supposedly supernatural powers.
So could you restate that again? Because I was lost in a misconception.
As yoga progresses, the modes of functioning which manifest will become more and more nonlinear, or may become more and more nonlinear. Some of which may seem to be miraculous to your former way of looking at things. But that's only in terms of the previous misconceptions of how things occur and what's occurring and so on and so forth.
Because of the linearity that we, yeah.
Exactly so. True functioning is absolutely nonlinear and absolutely independent of process.
And what do you mean by process?
Everything that occurs is essentially a miraculous occurrence in the instant, period. So there's no process, there's no development of necessary conditions and so on and so forth. Even
like
though
there
may appear to be, but nothing actually, that is actually not at all productive.
So a process might mean like improving, or is that what you mean by a process?
Process is a chain of events. There are no chains of events, although there may seem to be.
Yeah, okay.
The only event is this right here, right now. And the way it is what it is, and the way it seems to appear the way it appears, is entirely inscrutable.
Well, then let me ask you about that, because there seems to be experiences of synchronicity, like how this event and that event come together in this kind of amazing way, and it couldn't have been, contrived, and it was just, kind of like amazingly perfect
There's nothing but synchronicity.
all the time.
Everything is synchronicity.
So
Entirely
we're only-
everything.
So I'm only noticing it in certain instances when it seems bigger or,
Sure. But your notion of what's bigger is, again, subject to interpretation.
yeah, holy crap.
You can't possibly estimate the scale or the relevance or the potency of anything.
So synchronicity is occurring.
There's nothing but. There's literally nothing but. Which is very simple if you look at it. There's just this instantaneous point event, this here now, that can be found. And so all and everything that may seem to occur is this here now. And that being the case, where's there room for process? Where's there room for development? So you watch a bird fly across the sky, and the bird the flap of the wings at the instant doesn't build upon previous flaps of the wings. The bird in this instant happens to be there, and happens to be buoyant, and happens to be flapping its wings or whatever. That's a point event. It's absolutely synchronistically that way.
So when these supposed things come together, like this event meets that event, and then it's kind of like, holy crap, that's pretty amazing. It's the interpretation that makes this somehow different or special, more special.
No, the interpretation that anything else is less special is the problem. Everything is inconceivably special. When a car drives by on the street, it's the most special thing that it could possibly happen. Right there.
So incredible. I mean,
The mind basically censors. The mind diminishes. The mind makes lesser. It diminishes. It makes things smaller. It makes things less than they are. The mind is incapable of augmenting, because what's here is infinite and transcendental. So the mind collapses the infinite actuality into some degree of finiteness, which is a very heavy-handed collapsing. And in the process, it also collapses values.
So would you say in the expansion of that collapse, there's an integration that takes place between that absolute state though and the kind of mental conditioning day-to-day life, like some.
Yeah, it's not like that, because the collapse never expands, because there was no collapse.
Right.
The collapse was imagined into existence, and the collapse is non-existent. But the contrast between the fantasy of a collapsed, diminished condition and the actuality of the open-ended infinite condition is very drastic.
It seems like it.
Yeah,
Or, yeah.
true, by contrast.
Do you think animals are in suffering?
I don't know. That animals even exist is a fantasy. The only thing that I can know is my experience. And that's the only certainty that I have. So whether animals seem to appear, but animals might appear in my dreams. I don't know if they're there. I see an animal here, I don't know if it's here. I see you, I don't know if you're here. It's your problem.
I'm here.
I'm suffering.
You want me to prove I'm here?
So in the same token, I don't know that you're here, that I'm not, that you're not a manifestation of me speaking to myself,
Right.
or none of us are here.
Right. And even you yourself, you don't know if you're here as in terms of your body.
Right.
I mean, again, you could think, maybe, what if you're dreaming right now? And this is a dream. Well, is here even really here? And, you know, if there's a dream, are we here? Are you here? Are we talking? Or is it all being dreamt? And which is a euphemism for you don't know what's happening. Because a dream, you know, a dream is this word that seems to indicate something, but what it indicates is something that is absolutely unfathomable. Because again, you can't get to the bottom of what it is or how it works. But experientially, we have the experience of the way a dream, everything that seems to exist in a dream disappears instantaneously when we wake up.
Right.
And we have the experience as well that everything in the waking state disappears as soon as we go to sleep. But we don't typically remember that because we're typically, the waking consciousness, which is what we identify with now in the waking state, is not cognizant and the state immediately after going to sleep, so it might not notice that the waking state has disappeared. The only thing you can know for sure is the presence of experience, you know, which appears to present as all of this, the apparition of all these experiential characteristics. And of course, we're all very used to extrapolating from that and using it as a basis for a hypothesis of the existence of an objective world and other people and so on and so forth. But all of that's just a hypothesis. All you can know for certain, all that is self-verifyingly true, is the presence of the experiential field. But that's sufficient. You don't need to know more than that because the experiential field is you know, is full potency of itself for itself and is full value and richness of itself for itself. So all the richness that you've ever experienced in your experience is this experience. So it obviously, it's not a question of losing out on anything because it's not really here in some sense. It's just that interpreting it as being here in a heavy-handed way is a leap into belief, into faith. You're assuming something that you're hypothesizing is actually objectively true, unverifiable, you can't prove it. So it's like saying, I believe in Santa Claus. Well, fine, believe in Santa Claus all you want, but, you know.
Can you define experience?
No,
No?
no,
But you talk about it all the time.
there's nothing else to talk about. It's by default. No, but this is the essence of the spiritual challenge. Is what is this? What, you know, we call it experience maybe. What is it? And investigating that question is yoga. What is experience? I mean, that's the big question, by all means. You know, and there is an answer, but the answer is not an answer that can be said or an answer that can be thought. It's the answer of the self-verifying fact itself.
Which is pre-verbal.
Well, it's pre-verbal and post-verbal and non-verbal and verbal. You know, verbality is one small aspect of what occurs within actuality. But actuality is certainly not limited to that, but it includes that.
But in my experience, I found there was a time in which I seemed to exist to the edge of the universe. The universe had no size. I could list off a number of things that happened in traits. But I found that from that perspective, all words are lies. And so that's why I said pre-verbal. It seems to me that my experience of what seemed to be true and real had nothing to do with words, beyond words.
Well, it may be beyond words, but it hasn't left words behind. I mean, here's words. This is reality, and here's words. So it includes words. You could say I would say maybe transverbal rather than pre-verbal. So we're splitting here is transverbal.
Curious.
So beyond words, but not words or reality as some kind of dichotomy.
The way I would say it, but curious for your critique, is that all the words are lies, that I can be in a state of being that's more harmonious with truth, and then the words as excreta more or less communicate something to truth, but really it's me being something. It's not identifying with my thought.
Yeah, well, stronger than you can be, you always are. You always are in a state that has nothing to do with words.
Do you have a comment on appropriate? I'm concerned about the monkeys that surround me and threaten me with torture. Because I think that there's something interesting here. I imagine maybe I'm a utopianist. I would like something different than this. Or I allow for a possibility that there's, I find from that pre-verbal state that the universe is made out of a fabric of love, identification, and love being identification with the other as the self. Because there's no subject, there's only object. And in that way I find the words are lies. Do you find that in your experience error?
What you said, do I find it error?
Well, I would prefer to live in a world where people were experiencing reality directly and not identifying it and being afraid of the universe because of their thoughts.
Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice?
I imagine that it is, but I also imagine in that case the universe might collapse in on itself and start again because it's bored or something.
Who knows, right?
I guess I don't know. Well, I guess the point was the point. I'm not sure I'm insane because of these ideas about all ideas being wrong. And I'm afraid of the people surrounding me because I know that place and just how frightening this world is if you use words or identify with words. So I'm not sure how to behave.
Well, how do you behave?
Well, I alternate. It's almost like now that I am back to a dual state, and I'm operating from this dual state, more or less, this machine running. I feel insane. I trust myself. There's a part of me that I trust, that I would state is pre-verbal. And there's a part of me that I carried along in my conceptual framework that at the moment I find it perverse mostly and afraid. And so now I'm concerned that, I don't know. I don't know anything. But I would like to be less afraid of my understanding of the people around me, knowing that they're thinking.
How can you control the people around you?
All I find I can do is work on myself
Okay.
and maybe shine a light. And that maybe, if I'm not insane, maybe other people will stop torturing themselves, or maybe me. And that's all I can come up with.
Well, you're free to pursue that. I wish you luck.
So what do you do?
What do I do?
Well, what
I couldn't possibly say. I do what I do. And I couldn't say what that is.
What is your relationship to your mind?
I have no relationship to my mind. My mind exists within me. There's no me in my mind to be two different things to have a relationship. It's like, what's the relationship to my little finger? It exists within me. It's an aspect of what appears.
So then you would propose that my experience, which was when I felt non-dual, I could literally look at my mind. I could see it like this beautiful clockwork. I could see my personality, culture, language. It was like a beautiful watch, intricate, functioning, but it was not interested in the time. You could tell perfect time, it thought, but it was not interested in the time. And I was over here, interested. So I actually disidentified with my mind and my linguistic processing. That's not your experience.
The identification is arbitrary. There's degrees of identification that sits around wildly and has no relevance to anything whatsoever. What is here is what it is, inclusively. And everything we can talk about as aspects of that are aspects of this. So there's no, it's pointless to try to pick apart these subsystems that cannot be precisely analyzed or found anyway. Whereas if one looks and discovers that one is, in fact, the whole system that is here, the problems as problems remove themselves. And in terms of behavior, one does what one does, which of course has always been the case anyway.
Is the essential practice just letting go and letting go and letting go?
No, because the essential practice is seeing that there's nothing to let go of. You don't need to let go or not let go. It's an impossibility. There's no such thing anyway. Letting go is a pretense, and not letting go is a pretense. And when you see that's the case, then it becomes irrelevant. So seeing is the essential practice, always. See what is, what is, and how it is. And then all of these seeming side issues, or maybe not side issues, evaporate in relevance. But trying to do something or not do it, trying to change something or not change it, is just playing games with oneself and doesn't achieve anything. The important thing is to see what is already the case. The only thing that matters, the only thing that has actuality, has always been the case, is already the case, and always will be the case. So all of this pretense about change and moving from this to that is just gamesmanship within that and entirely irrelevant.
So just acceptance?
Well, no, even not acceptance. Doesn't matter, you don't even need to accept it, just see it. And when you see it, the implications of that does what it does. You'll see there's nothing to accept and nothing to not accept. And yet you're free to accept and not accept all you want, because it doesn't matter a damn. Since there is nothing to accept, what difference does it make whether you accept it or not? It's all very paradoxical.
So seeing is different than perceiving,
Yes.
with all perception being dualistic.
Perceiving is seeing. Seeing is perceiving. But seeing is different than perceiving too. By seeing, I mean, perhaps I could use the word recognizing. Recognition might be more succinct. But again, it's pointless to try to get precious with the words because none of them are true anyway. At best, they're evocative of what I'm trying to indicate.
I guess I'm also thinking about what this gentleman was saying with his perception from the non-dual state. There was a perception of duality within that. There was a projection of duality, of the mind is separate or the mind is this or that.
Sure.
And that's like habitual dualism on a cosmic scale.
Well, whether it's habitual and whether it's cosmic, it's all the same thing. It's a result of interpretation. And in looking at what this is, one will discover that interpretation is always inaccurate, which invalidates all interpretation. So whether it's dual or non-dual, who gives a shit? Because that's all fabrication. That's all just games. All interpretations are games. And as such, they have no potency. They have no, they're emasculated. They're irrelevant. So the fact that we have a lifelong history of being invested in doing all this interpreting is neither here nor there. When you see its irrelevance, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you keep on doing it. Who gives a shit? Because again, it's nothing. It's a game that the mind plays with itself that doesn't, in fact, affect anything whatsoever. Because what is here, the only thing that is here is unaffected by it. So therefore nothing is affected by all these games. It's like if you dream of this or dream of that, does the dreamer give a shit? It doesn't affect it. It's not, it doesn't have any impact.
In the moment, there's the fear or the lust or whatever it is that's experienced in the dream.
Sure, all that.
But, from the outside, it's like worrying about a phantom who was born in a mirage.
Well, all of this always looks like something. And the something it always looks like will be pregnant with implications and qualities. And so it can be anything. It can be boring, it can be terrifying, it can be lustful, it can be, whatever, just bang, infinite spectrum of experiential flavors. But what it is unaffected by what it looks like, and what it looks like is unstoppable, and what it looks like is not actual except as an apparition. And given that fact, or that constellation of facts, if you want, all of what it looks like just becomes irrelevant. You can't do anything about it. So the fact that it's terrifying or whatever is like, okay, well, but it's just a mirage. So again, it's a terrifying mirage. So how much are you gonna worry about it?
So isn't there a quality of tapping into kind of the energy of that, the potency of it? So if we have a really potent fantasy, that's different than having a lackadaisical fantasy.
No.
I mean, in terms of the experience, we get caught up in the potency.
Well, that, yeah, but it's easy to get caught up in lackadaisicalness too. It just looks, we don't typically orient to that as being caught up, even if it is. But again, even being caught up is not an issue. It's easy to polarize this. It's really easy to go to, interpretation is bad, uninterpretation is good, and getting caught up in interpretation is the ultimate bad. But it isn't. Even getting caught up isn't. The one thing that matters is recognizing what this is, and even that doesn't matter. So nothing matters.
Right. And in the recognition, you're not trying to change it. It's not trying. Like, I need to recognize it so that I get rid of my fear. That's not an issue.
Recognition is something that you don't have any choice over anyway.
If you have the nature of things.
Yeah, if it's your nature to either seek or to participate in recognitions, so be it. And that may look like a lot of personal investment and so on, but in actuality, what it really is, that's the way the chips are falling.
So does that correlate to people's, it appears to me in my reality that most people could give a shit about what we're talking about and would rather pursue their own agendas and their own illusions. But it's like they're ignoring their recognition, because if the recognition is pervasive, if the recognition is every moment is recognizing itself, but then people are choosing to like, okay, well, I'm going to ignore that and I'm going to like focus on my vision. So are they taking that recognition? Are they taking the energy of that recognition and somehow using it, distorting it, or are they?
There's no using. The energy of recognition is the soul energy.
Yes.
And it permeates everything. So it may seem to feed all sorts of so on and so forth, but in actuality, it's just this doing itself.
Right.
And all these different, sort of cataloging all these different ways that it can seem, or it can seem to happen, is again, ultimately irrelevancies.
Right. It's all just manifestation of that.
Yes.
Even if it's tricking you.
Yeah, well, especially if it's always tricking. Tricking is what it does.
Right. So that's an interesting
it always nakedly reveals itself, but it always nakedly reveals itself as unfathomability, so you can't ever find it. It's always showing you what it is, but you can never find it. I mean, it's befuddling. And so here we are, and we're chasing whatever we're chasing, and never finding.
And it's always our tail.
but never finding, and this is the nature of actuality. But the chasing and never finding are non-issues, because that's what it does. It's not something you're doing and not doing, and it's not a failure to not do that.
Right.
It's just, that's what reality does. And you're not doing it, and what it's actually doing is unfathomable, and who knows, and
right. And it's fine, but we self-identify with that, and we're like, oh shit.
Sure. Yeah. But identifying happens, and identifying again is neither here nor there.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the case of identification, I mean, the cardinal opportunity of yoga is that realization is possible. Recognition is possible. Period. And so it's up to the yogi to take advantage of that. And they're a yogi by virtue of the fact that they're inclined to try and take advantage of that. And that's the whole shooting match right there. But aside from the grandiose aspirations of the yogi, all of that's irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether the yogi ever, realizes anything.
It's the yogi's fantasy.
Yeah.
Of accomplishment.
Yeah. And yet it may be an actuality. But even if it is, it's a zero-sum game, nothing is gained. But on the other hand, empirically, yoga can seem to happen.
Right.
Yogis can seem to realize, superficially speaking. So those of us that are inclined to have any interest in all of that, it's possible to explore these issues and engage in them to whatever degree we can. And but it doesn't mean anything. It's not any more or less important than anything else, which is of absolutely no importance.
Right. So here I am, right, projecting my reality, and there's 2,000 of us in this room. And by implication, that means all billions of beings outside this room, I could say, are ignorant and not caring about reality. But that's just my projection. So it could be as my awareness improves, I could realize that actually everybody out there is totally in tune with reality. And has always been, and it's just my perception. I'm the last guy on the boat, It's like
well, no, I mean that's actually literally true. Everything is in tune with reality. Being out of tune with reality cannot happen. Reality is in tune with itself by identity. It is itself, so of course it's in tune with itself. And everything whatsoever is reality doing itself. So by definition, not just by definition in a conceptual sense, but inherently, everything whatsoever is in tune with reality. So to the extent that there's other beings, they're all in tune with reality.
Right.
And if they're wandering around like clueless, ignorant idiots, that's what being in tune with reality happens to look like in that context.
And is that it's like a true paranoid projection? It's like
it would be a true paranoid projection if it was actually like that. But again, in the face of recognition, in the face of recognition, in the face of realization, one discovers that, in fact, all this way of spinning it is all hopelessly partialized fantasy, and it's not actually like that.
Mhm.
Delusion is not actually delusion.
Right, there's that sense of relief of like, oh, whew, it's
Yeah, but paranoid fantasy creates a narrative, and the narrative is actually untrue. It's inherently untrue. So the paranoid, and in seeing this, the paranoid fantasy is invalidated. The condition isn't invalidated, but the condition is not what the paranoid fantasy is defining it as being anyway, so it's neither here nor there.
Because if there's others out there, is what you're talking about.
Sure, that's part of it. I mean, they're defined into existence. That there are others is a paranoid fantasy.
It is the paranoid fantasy.
Well,
I was waiting for that to be spoken. I was like, come on, Peter, I know you're going to say something.
I mean, it always, in pragmatic terms, it always gets down to just see what is undeniably, self-verifyingly actual, period. And I mean, that really separates the wheat from the chaff. Are there other people? Well, what I know for a fact is that there seem to be shapes in my field of vision, or a vast range of differentiated colors within my field of vision. I know there happens to be a vast range of apparently it seems to be a vast range of differentiated sounds in my field of hearing, a vast range of differentiated thought in my field of thinking, so on and so forth. So given that, that's self-verifyingly true. Does that translate into other people? There's a leap there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like assuming the other people that you're in the dream when you're dreaming are actually there.
Right, and it doesn't even translate into its own reality. What you're saying, I mean, that perceptive reality really doesn't translate to. I mean, that's also a leap.
I don't follow. No.
Well, because it's
which perceptive reality.
Well, if I'm perceiving sounds and smells and sights.
Right. No, even that's too much, of course.
Yeah. I mean, to establish that is a leap in itself too.
It is.
But
that's not true. But I mean, I was using that for the sake of
okay.
discourse. It's something you can talk about.
The image I got when you said that is almost like a yogi triage. It's like, okay, I'm having a crisis. I better, focus on what can be saved here. What can be saved can be the primary experience. What is going on in the field of experience.
Sure. Absolutely.
Right. And discard the rest.
Yeah, because you're going to what is powerful here, and what is powerless. Okay. What is effective and what has no effect.
Okay.
What is real and what is unreal. Discrimination is essential in the as the core, as the foundation of yoga. You have to recognize reality. You have to find reality itself, or you have nothing to work with. You're just wandering around in a haze for the purposes of yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And noticing the judgments on supposed others. I mean, judgments.
Is seeing happening through the mind?
Depends what you mean by seeing. Vision?
What do you mean, like, you said just seeing?
Recognition.
Like recognition or whatever.
No.
What are we talking about?
No, recognition happens transcendentally. What it recognizes is the same thing that's seeing your experience right now.
And transcendental is indefinable.
Transcendental transcends definition. That's what transcendental means. It transcends definability, it transcends resolvability. It transcends collapsing down into anything that is recognizable or differentiable as a thing. In other words, there's an inclusive, inseparable, transcendental whole. And everything and anything whatsoever is actually that. And so in dealing with anything and anything whatsoever, you're actually dealing with that. So discrimination means go to first principle. So if I'm thinking of having a conversation with you, I'm actually It's actually about that, or this, let's say.
Mhm.
And so you are this, conversation is this,
Mhm.
and so on and so forth. So you get real, it's a reality check. Collapse to what it actually is, and then orient to it that way, and then see what the implications of that are, rather than just running off with the implications of your inaccurate interpretations of what it might be, which is just going to lead you hither and yon into endless confusion and frustration.
Again, does the implication involve mind?
Yes and no. Implication involves mind, but implication is also inherent. Because the nature of the way this actuality is with itself, it is intrinsically full of implication. And of course, the mind seizes on this implication and translates that into actual conceptual implications. You know, remember I said that we were talking this morning about how this is fundamentally an exclusive infinite continuum, and it is infinitely differentiated within itself. Now, but the differentiation is not plain vanilla. It's not a uniform differentiation which looks like gray.
Non-linear.
It's very nonlinear. It seems to be clumped, let's say. And the nature of those clumpings is where the implication is displayed. But the clumpings, again, don't resolve into actual clumpings, because if you look at the information that's present in any supposed clump, it's arbitrary to hold it that it's this way. You can subdivide it further or include it. Or, in other words, there's many ways to see it, each of which has a different implication of what it is, none of which are verifiable.
You mean it goes off in infinite directions?
Yes. While still being not uniform.
Right, by still having clumping qualities.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like a galaxy within a universe.
It's like, think of a galaxy, it's like a galaxy.
Okay.
You know,
What is the it?
actuality.
Okay.
We're talking about the differentiation. Actuality is an infinite inclusive continuum, and it is infinitely differentiated within itself without departing from itself. So the differentiation is all within itself. And the differentiation is nonlinear, it's not uniform. It seems to be lumpy.
I keep trying to grasp at an example of that. I mean, how does that apply to a flower and a bee?
A flower and a bee are both clumps.
Okay, that are interacting clumps. With their own clumps.
Well, if the clumps actually existed, they could be seen as interacting. Since they aren't, since they're being clumps is itself an abstraction. I mean, all of reality is completely interactive with all of reality. So the bee is interacting with the bee, the flower is interacting with the flower is interacting with the bee, the bee is interacting with the flower is interacting with the air, the bee is interacting with the air is interacting with the air. This atom is interacting with that atom, this atom is interacting with that atom, that electron is interacting with that electron. I mean, wherever you look, you find absolute universal interaction.
It's like a uniform fabric folding and interacting with itself in different folds, different.
Perhaps not.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it appears to be happening.
Yes, it appears to be happening. It is, and it appears to be happening. But exactly what happening means, and for that matter, exactly what appears means, is unfindable. or let's say unresolvable ultimately.
Quantum entanglement could be an example of that.
Well, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Is that one of the reasons that people don't like this kind of stuff, is that it's not resolvable?
Sure. People want a takeaway. The big takeaway here is that there's no takeaway. How satisfying is that?
I already wrote my check.
You gotta be some kind of a pervert if that rings your bell. You know, and yogis tend to be. Yogis are eccentric, they're perverts, they're unnatural relative to the great masses,
Mm-hmm.
you know, superficially speaking, who want a takeaway. You want a result. You know, I paid all my money and I didn't even get a goddamn t-shirt.
Well, you should start giving out t-shirts. No. Yeah, no, you don't get anything. It's just.
You don't get anything. In fact, if anything, you lose everything without actually losing anything, which is again so weird.
What a relief.
You don't even get to take that with you. You don't even get to take away the losing everything because you haven't actually lost anything. So, you know, you're just fucked every which way.
I've signed up for the imaginary losing everything. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, well, no, a lot of people go that way. It's very popular.
Put a plug in there for Facebook. I mean, not Facebook, YouTube.
So sounds like seeing and recognizing is the main thing to do.
Yes.
But I don't know what I'm not clear on what that is.
Good. Doing it consists of discovering what it is. Doing it consists of discovering what it is.
Okay.
You don't know how to do it before you do it.
Okay.
You do it in order to discover what it is. And, you know, I've tried to give you a few tricks and hints along the way. So one good way to prime the pump for recognizing is find something in your experience that is amazing.
Yeah.
And you don't know why it's amazing. It's not amazing because of this, that, and the other. It's just, wow. I mean, you walk along and you see a flower by the road and you just, wow. Or you see the light shining off a window in a certain way, sparkling, and you go, wow. Anything, doesn't matter. The circumstance is not important. The important thing is the fact that you cannot wrap your head around what's special about it, but it explicitly exhibits, it manifestly exhibits some specialness. So right away, you're recognizing it. You're experiencing direct actuality outside the context of your interpretation to some degree. And that's the point. Because everyone's always doing that, but we don't recognize we're doing it because we typically keep going back recursively to the interpretation. Oh, I'm looking at this and what's causing it is this, and explanation, explanation, explanation. But in actual fact, experience is not explainable. And so the whole point is to notice that fact. And the easy way to notice that fact is to just find something in your experience that pops somehow. It's like, wow, you know, beautiful sunset, or anything, or it can be something ugly, you know, some horrible smell or anything. Just something that is, wow, you know, something that's actual, but you can't possibly describe it or define it or anything. And as you train in that, you'll become more sensitive, and you'll be able to recognize more of your experience as being like that. And ultimately, you'll notice all of your experiences like that. All experience is actually direct experience outside the context of interpretation, even if interpretation's happening, because experience is not contained within interpretation. Interpretation is a small mental event in the face of actual experience, which is just present miraculously. It's just here. You aren't seeing because you're thinking of seeing. The seeing just happens. It's a miracle. It's just here. It's, you know, light is present in your experience. And then you may be thinking about it, so this is this or that's that, but that happens in the face of this, miraculous, undescribable, irrational presence. And the point is to let yourself become more sensitive to that. And again, so that's what you do. And you do it by being playful with it, be light and playful with it. If you're dutiful, then your mind will turn that into something. It'll just feed your interpretations more. But if you do it like a game or do it frivolously, your mind won't be able to get a hold of that. And so it'll be more powerful in your experience. It'll accumulate.
So, working as a counselor, noticing how people are attached to their story and almost seem threatened to see the story.
Oh, absolutely. Typically in yoga, you'll come across that, depending upon your personality type and depending upon the degree of your unfoldment, aspects of revelation will be terrifying.
I know, this is what really kind of is, I find it astonishing.
Because in challenging the interpretive frameworks, you're rocking the boat big time. And the whole personality structure and emotional structure has an enormous investment in orienting to the interpretive framework. So you're kind of at war inside yourself. Again, depending upon your particular, it's like a
I don't
chemistry.
seem to recall that kind of terror.
Different people have different natures. It's not important.
Could you share something in your story of this that equates to that, what you just described of coming up against some kind of...
For me, not so much. It wasn't particularly terrifying or frightening. Unsettling more. I have a quirky personality though. I mean, not that everyone doesn't, but the way in which my quirky personality is quirky, I'm very anti my own establishment.
So would you say what the unsettling was in relation to?
It's not important.
Oh.
None of this is important. I'm just observing that it can occur as a symptom of someone becoming, by their experience, challenging their habitual investment in orienting things in terms of their narration or their story interpretation.
Yeah, that's it.
And as it becomes challenged, that can be threatening with various symptoms. But it's not an important phenomenon in itself. For the yogi, sooner or later, the unsettlement wins, and the investment in story is transcended. For most people, it doesn't. For most people, even if their narrative becomes unsettled, they'll just jump into a new narrative. Leave one religion and buy into another. Leave my marriage and have another sucky relationship.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I don't mean my marriage, I'm hypothetical.
There you go, you.
But yoga, what characterizes yoga is one is not interested in upgrading one's interpretive framework. One's interested in in transcending the interpretive framework altogether.
Right.
You're going through, you're penetrating that whole universe and departing from it, rather than trying to improve it.
Yeah.
That's why true yoga is not self-improvement. And getting caught up in self-improvement, which a great deal of spirituality is not true yoga. It's just, playing games within one's delusion, so technically speaking. Which is fine.
Yeah.
Not everyone's cut out to be a yogi in this life or what have you.
Well, that reinforces just the deficiency, like I have to let go of this or, that so that I can be better. I mean, that seems to be what's at the bottom of the self-improvement.
You're exchanging one interpretation for another.
Yeah.
Trying to upgrade. You're trying to get to version 2.0. Or whatever 0.0.
But the threat of, this is what is astonishing to me, the threat of seeing how our interpretation of the childhood is an interpretation, how devastating that is taken is.
But that's better seeing how any interpretation is devastating. It's the interpretations that are being defended.
Yeah.
Because of identification. Your interpretations, your story is who you claim to be. And if I say you're not that, I'm threatening you because you think you are the story. And if the story's being challenged, then you feel like you're being challenged and you want to, put up your dues. Of course, it's not true. You're not really the story. But if you're in that point in unfoldment where you're heavily identifying with stories and it's very threatening, you feel challenged when your story's challenged.
Yeah.
What isn't part of our maturing is having that material, that kind of raw material of our experience, and we reinterpret it constantly, looking at it from different points of view. Like, oh, it really wasn't traumatic, or oh, I really wasn't abandoned. I was actually loved. We see it constantly shifting until eventually we're like, what the hell? I don't even know what happened.
But is that another interpretation?
Yeah.
Well, it's not essential. In unfoldment, interpretation may continue to go on, and interpretation may shuffle itself around, but all of that eventfulness is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the area is going somewhere else and doing something else when all of that is happening or not. So it's not of any concern.
Mm-hmm.
Just let it be what it is.
Like you were saying this morning, it's not a matter of working through it.
No, right.
And it's an infinite thing, so we can't work through it.
Yeah. It's not a problem and it doesn't have a solution. It's just irrelevant. So you bypass it altogether and go to this that is here.
Well, that's an interesting word. I've heard of spiritual bypass. What is that in relation to what you're talking about, or is it?
I don't know, it's some bullshit, some terminology, someone had to make up something to talk about. Some books or something. I mean, there's all sorts of psychological, internal psychological driving that can seem to occur in any context, and certainly in a context that's being defined as spiritual. I don't know the technical terms, disassociation or this or that. But those are psychological events. Calling it spiritual doesn't make it so. And spirituality has nothing to do with any of those events one way or the other. Spirituality does bypass all of that. So in a profound sense, true yoga is spiritual bypass. But I'm not sure that's the sense in which whoever coined that phrase was trying to.
Well, it has a negative connotation, like you're doing something wrong.
Well, anything that has any connotation whatsoever is already in an interpretive framework, so it's irrelevant for our purposes.
No, because I really want to understand this.
Understand what specifically?
So recently someone said, well, you know, you can, and I'm misquoting, you can go try to hang out in the absolute, but then you're not really dealing with your feelings and, you know,
Right. You can hang out in the absolute, but then you're not really dealing with your feelings.
we'll say more about
But you
that.
got the absolute, so who's the winner and who's the loser?
Shit about your feelings.
Yeah.
That person was worried you're not gonna care about her feelings.
I mean, the mechanisms, the psychological mechanisms are going to be in place doing what they do anyway, whether you're going to the absolute or not. So you're going to be dealing with your feelings or not, however you are. You may as well be getting the absolute while all that's going on as not. I mean, you know, there's a real cynicism in that, to me, implicit in that kind of a view that implies that the absolute is make-believe and it has no power. And, you know, the
Or
absolute
that
is
it's an
like,
escape. That's the attitude that I pick up.
yeah,
It's an
but
escape. You're escaping.
but people who believe that probably genuinely think that. But they don't think spirituality is real. It's a game they're playing.
No, actually, these are quote unquote spiritual teachers
Just because someone's called a spiritual teacher doesn't mean they have a clue.
in non-duality.
Non-duality. Why did you say so? Oh my God, non-duality.
True religion.
Yeah, these spiritual non-dual teachers, you know. And if you're just hanging out in the absolute and life is messy and you want to avoid it.
If you can hang out in the absolute, my advice is get off your butt and do it.
Yeah.
Where else are you going? Oh, I don't want any of that absolute stuff. You know, God, that's for sissies. I want the juicy emotional entanglement stuff. I want the soap opera. It's like, well, cool, you're a good company. Most people do. You know, and just because, again, you know, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, just because someone is called a spiritual teacher, and even if thousands of other people call them a spiritual teacher, and they have books out and TV shows and God knows what, doesn't mean they have a clue. And just because someone doesn't have all that doesn't mean they don't have a clue.
Yeah.
You know, when you're dealing with people, be skeptical, be critical. It's like you're dealing with anyone. You know, look at Trump. He's, by many standards, he's this enormously successful billionaire businessman. You know, he's the top of some heap. But he's a total asshole, bullshit, incompetent jerk, near as I can tell. I mean, I haven't met the man. Maybe he's a wonderful guy, you know. But I doubt it. But the point being, just because someone claims they are something, and just because hundreds or thousands or even millions of other people reinforce that, doesn't make it so.
Well,
think for yourself.
Well, this is really helpful because, you know, events happen. You know, an emotional reaction, a sensation, tension can arise. They're seeing it. But there was kind of almost a feeling of like, okay, well, I have to defend that I actually did allow myself to feel these feelings before I realized that this is simply an occurrence and this really isn't real. I mean, this is an interpretation, blah, 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 that's creating this from the past. I mean, there's a lot of words here, so bear with me. And that would be being called, oh, you are not wanting to deal with your feelings, you're not wanting to deal with life. Life is messy. You know, this is really helpful because, yeah.
I'll tell you a secret. Life is not messy. Life is a crystalline, transcendent perfection. It's a transcendent synchronicity.
Then say more.
Say saying it won't do any good.
It will be good.
See for yourself. Look for yourself and see the way that that's so.
So why is that said? Why are these teachers saying life is messy and Are
You have to ask,
trying
you have to ask them that. Why is Trump saying what he's saying? You have to ask him that. I don't know, I sure wouldn't say it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's no different.
People are just people. There's no status. The status isn't this inherent, status is what it actually is, not what it seems to be in terms of social acceptance or social, behaviors.
So life in and of itself, just to say that it's messy is an interpretation, is a judgment.
And saying that it's messy means that you're holding it, there's some non-messiness that it could or should be. Messy is only messy by contrast with some non-messiness, and there is no such thing. The degree of order, or you could say disorder in life, is not contrasted with anything. It is what it is.
Well, they could say, well, it is what it is. Life is messy. It is what it is. But what you're saying is ultimately that that's a distinction. Or what are you saying? Because they could say,
Messy is a distinction from some non-messiness.
yeah.
And show me a non-messy life. If life is messy, then it's not messy anymore because there's no non-messy life. But that's not just sophistry. Look at it, it's true. That's not just a word game.
And seeing things as they are, meaning the diminished identification,
Well, they arbitrary identification, but yeah.
okay?
Excuse me.
It seems less messy because there's less attachment or wrapped up in whatever was perceived as messy.
Well, exactly what does messy mean?
Well, I think they're talking about relationships and people getting upset with each other or making demands or.
They're absolutely perfect. What do you mean messy?
That's what I'm
People
hearing.
get together and it doesn't work and they fall apart. That happens with absolute precision. Where's the messiness? People get together and they can't communicate well and they have warped emotional reactions, which turns into a slow motion train wreck. And where's the messiness? That's like a well-oiled machine. The thing shakes down in accordance with the elements that constitute it. Show me two sane people and you'll have a relationship they're going to be less messy. Show me two, incoherent neurotic messes like most people are, and I'll show you a relationship that's liable to be a mess. But it's not actually messy, it's actually a precise dance of perfection, of exactly what, of all the elements that are actually present, working themselves through.
So life is this crystalline perfection, and our karma is our endless interpretation of that.
No, karma is, karma is very subtle, and it's very easy to misunderstand. Karma includes interpretation, but it is not actually generated by or limited to interpretation. Karma is the patterning that seems to be present in actuality. It includes interpretation, but it's more than just interpretation.
Okay, so it's almost like the inherent archetypes of the
Yeah.
I mean, they're there. They're in the fabric of reality of these.
Well, it's in the fabric of your reality.
Right.
Your karma is in the fabric of your reality.
Right.
Things, you could say, you could put it very clumsily by saying the range of things that tend to appear in the way that they do tend to appear that way. And for someone else, it's different. In other words, so that you might say it's impossible to verbalize it. Every now and then I have a flash of insight and put it in a clever way, but it doesn't seem to be happening as we speak. Maybe it's something else strike me.
Well, but earlier you're talking about the clumping. So in
Yeah.
other words, it's like the personal clumping.
Yes, but and it includes interpretation, but it's not limited to interpretation.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So, I mean, we make our karma worse with our interpretation. Right.
No, karma can't be made better or worse, because the working out of karma as it being better or worse is itself karma.
Okay, so karma itself is mechanical, like you were saying, it's those steps in relationship as the train right now.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
mechanical clicking.
Yeah, it's what the system of your actuality looks like as it plays itself out, is one way to put it.
Okay.
But it's not essential, it's all apparitional.
Right, so you could step out of the train wreck. I mean, you can.
Well, the reason you're not, karma is comprehensive, but you're not actually stuck in it. And the reason you're not stuck in it is because karma is actually infinite. And as soon as something is infinite, it no longer is resolvable. And as soon as something is unresolvable, it disappears as a specific.
So is that another way of saying if you don't identify with it?
No. Although identification tends to finitize it. But it's not necessarily about identification. Let me see this, give me a sec, let me try and put this more clearly. The apparent patterning in your life is not actual patterning, because the patterns themselves are made of elements that are intrinsically infinite. And that being the case, the seeming pattern is not actually the way it seems to be. If you look more closely, you'll discover it's different than that, and you look more closely and it's different than that, and you look more closely it's different than that, and so on forever. So if you investigate what anything seems to be, the end point of your investigation is going to be wildly divergent from your starting point. And so which is it? Which is the pattern? Is it the starting point? Is it the end point? Is it in between? Yeah, it's any and all of those, because it's not a single thing.
So is that what you were saying, the infiniteness of karma?
Yes.
Okay. And that's where part of our problems come, because we want to do something with the karma. We want to change it,
Yes.
we want to avoid it, we want to increase it.
Yeah, because we think it's actual, and we think what's worse is we think it contains us, or it embodies us. It does not contain us. It appears within us.
Oh, I see. So that's why self-identification isn't really an issue, because
Yeah. That itself just appears within you.
Yeah.
Identification is very arbitrary. Identification is kind of like focus of attention. It's a kind of a very mutable, very mobile principle that just drifts around through experience, by degrees, and has no importance in itself. Although it seems to have importance because it seems to have emphases, obvious emphases and so on.
Right. It will provide us with something.
Yeah.
It seems to be kind of a fundamental, maybe it's my habit, but it seems to be a fundamental quality of the mind to identify or to try to identify.
Well, the fundamental quality of the mind is interpreting, and identification follows from interpretation. You have to have identified something as existing before you can identify with it.
Okay. So it's a chicken and egg kind of thing.
Yeah.
They both happen.
They coexist. I mean, ultimately, it's not like one comes first, but they're aspects of the same phenomenon, and ultimately of no importance, which is the important point in terms of yoga.
Mm-hmm. Right. The mind's just going to do that. That's what mind can do.
Yep.
And the universe would be less without that.
Well, whether it would be less or not, the activity of mind is a small event in a vast actuality, which is not entrapped or limited by that small event.
Yeah, it's interesting. This backdrop you have is kind of amazing, because it's like this discussion of our little humanness is taking place within this expanding universe.
Synchronicity.
I mean, it's quite vivid. It's like, oh, there we are. Here's our galaxy. That little dot's over there.
Yeah, recognize it.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break? Get up and stretch and see you in a minute.
Hope you're coming.
Thank you for grabbing that.
Oh, we go to that, we go to that. Yeah.
You can get whatever you want from those.
Yeah, sure, you're right. I've always thought about
Here. Oh, no, we're good.
Yeah, we made it.
One last week.
It was. You already did the money, didn't you?
No, I think it's a plus.
Well, I think we got it at the same time. We probably felt that you had tipped.
Considering that amount of time.
Yeah.
Right.
We made it. Extra goes into a kitty. So if you are low, it's not a problem. We just take the money out of the kitty. So, thank you. It's not 50, it's 40. You want to give me that? You live way down in, where do you live?
Can't get the right way.
Live in Kent, right? Where do you live?
Usually about 45 minutes. Count on. Being anything to get. About 45 minutes.
So do you typically coordinate your visits up
You're
there?
doing it since 2013.
Oh, wow.
You know, I was thinking it's a piercing. School. Yeah, cost it. So then all you have to do is just collect enough money that you just slide it. That's 40. That's 40 from everybody do that? Oh, yeah, no, we're okay. And if we go above, we keep it in a kitty, so if we're below, it's not a problem, because we're not doing spent profit, so we just use that to fill it back. The guy just raised the prices. When I first started coming, it was $85 an hour. When I screamed, it was
Rent goes up everywhere.
Yeah. Please. This is going to be
Location wise, it's nice.
Yes, yeah, it's quiet here. It's a lot of light.
Yeah.
That's what I like.
So you're using 4G to do the YouTube?
Yeah, he's got all new little hotspot there.
Pretty good.
Peter, when we were talking about karma, it was sort of like seeing looked to me like kind of like holographic, going like this, and it's made out of light, right? So you can't really say what that is except of light. And then suddenly recognizing that you are the light that's actually animating that changes the fact. So there's no longer, you're just seeing the light patterns. And if you look closely at them, you don't recognize anything as you go into it. So
Exactly, and
each
the
one's different.
patterns don't contain anything.
No, they
limit
don't contain anything. They don't have any forces going this way. They're just light sparkling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd like to capture.
It's on there.
Oh, it is? That what you just said?
Yeah.
We're live. Don't say anything you don't want the NSA to hear.
Yeah.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm bringing cards.
That's right. I got your.
Okay, yeah.
Apple was in temperature wine.
Yeah, it's nice. It turned out to be a lovely day.
But I'm trying to. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and if for some reason we don't. All right. Yeah, I'd like to have that president. Oh, good. Yeah.
Is that like a latte pattern on the back of your shirt?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought at first, my first thought was it looks martial arts, Zen or something.
Yeah, what about you?
Sorry.
They change t-shirts, a lot of work. The baristas, like a collection.
Oh, there's several different styles. I don't know. I'm not from around here, so I probably not, or at least not in the last few decades.
Where you from?
I live in Eastern Washington.
Oh, so you came all the way over here for that?
I did. Yeah, I'm happy.
We're back. Pretty crappy bell there.
Crystal glass.
One thing I'd like to emphasize, the one essential principle, the really powerful principle of actuality inherently, that I recommend you play with and investigate, is the principle of unresolvability. Or you could think of it as infinity if you like, but that is a little technical and it might throw some people off. Unresolvability is much simpler. The simple fact that you cannot precisely tell what anything is. Anything that appears in experience whatsoever, including experience itself, is evident, but you can't pin it down with precision exactly what it is. And this can appear in all sorts of guises. It can appear in the visual field. It can, for example, it can appear as a kind of aspects of fuzziness or aspects of well, anyway.
Well, give some examples. I love examples.
Examples is nothing but examples.
Or of indecision.
You can't tell what anything is.
You say fuzziness is like when you're trying to look at the periphery or?
Sure, fuzziness. Try and find exactly where the edges of the glass are. Well, they seem to be very sharp, but the closer you look, you discover they're fuzzy, they're not sharp. And you look even closer, they're fuzzy again. And not just fuzzy, but also nebulous in terms of pinning down precisely. So what colors do you see when you look at this glass? You know, you're trying, well, it's sort of, I see a sort of a greenish gray, but is it a little more green, or, you know, in other words, it's like trying to figure out the exact value of pi, you know. Well, it's a little more than 3.14, but it's a little less than 3.16, you know, and so you're looking for it on a number line, and you keep getting closer and closer and closer, but you can never hit it. Because it's unresolvable.
What would be an example of hearing? Do you have an example for us for the fuzziness or whatever it is?
Everything, all hearing is fuzzy, but I'm an ex-drummer, so. It's a miracle I can hear it all.
You have to press pointers, Peter. I'm here to ask for.
No, look for yourself. Look at the way exactly what anything is, in any sense whatsoever. This is not something that is where you make lists of qualities and remember them. This is where you
can
discover for
one, and then
yourself.
I'll have an idea, like.
You can't tell except precisely what anything is. You can tell pretty close. You can tell real close, but you can't tell precisely.
Well, that example of pi is perfect.
Well, of course it's perfect, but people who are mathematically inclined will be able to follow. People that aren't, it would, you know, would be meaningless. But how about people? So think of someone you know really well. Think of someone you don't know well. But you know them a little bit. You've talked to them a few times. So you sort of have a feeling for what they're like, who they are. But you don't know exactly. And the more you interact with them, the more you learn about them. But you still don't know everything. You still don't know exactly who they are. And you know them more, and you know more about them, but you still don't know exactly. So you lived your whole life with them, and you know everything there is to know about them, but you still don't know exactly. Or yourself. Who exactly are you? You know yourself really, 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 really well in all sorts of ways, but who exactly are you? You can't say precisely, oh, I'm exactly this. You know, I mean, the more you let go into generalization, the more easy it is to be certain, and the more easy it is to be able to pretend to resolve it. But if you want to be really specific and really precise, resolution cannot be done. Now, the importance of this principle and the fact that it is objectively true, this actuality that is here is intrinsically unresolvable in every way. So if you investigate that and discover it for yourself, the importance of that principle is that all interpretation is based upon resolvability. Mm-hmm. You can't interpret what anything is unless you think there's a something to interpret. And you can't find any somethings because of unresolvability. Now this is, you know, this may sound like a very, very abstract philosophy, but experientially it's extremely simple. And it can be very powerful to discover for yourself that no interpretation can be true because all interpretations are caricatures or oversimplifications of the actual condition, which is vastly beyond any interpretation. So whatever you think something is, it's more than that. Experientially, which means actually, it is more than that. And so when you see that, then that invalidates, that inherently disproves and takes the potency out of interpretations.
Okay, so interpretation may be very precisely, but less precise is good enough sometimes.
Well, the problem with less precise is it enables mistakes. So, for example, I could draw a caricature of you, let's say, and it would look kind of like you. I could show it to anyone in this room and they'd say, yeah, that's you. But it doesn't look, but you don't look exactly like the caricature I drew. You wouldn't look, you look like this. You don't look like this drawing. So it's similar, it's close, It's an approximation, but it's not you. It's not what you look like. It's something else that I'm claiming has something to do with you, and it has absolutely nothing to do with you. And so the problem is that these approximations diverge from the actuality and set up an alternate actuality.
Yeah.
And if you take them to be true, you're living in a world that doesn't exist. Now, in many cases, this may not be an issue, you know, but in yoga and spirituality, it's essential. It's very important, because with yoga, the issue is, what is reality? What is this actuality that is here? And taking approximations as being good enough is the whole problem of not recognizing, or that basically is the basis for the whole problem of not recognizing the nature of actuality. See, approximations are fine for most human functioning today. You know, if I say, to get to the restaurant, you know, you walk 2 blocks this way and take a right, and go, I don't say, you know, you have to go exactly here, you know, and you know, 0.0003 centimeters past this point. I mean, you know, it doesn't matter. It's just over there, and you wander around, sooner or later you'll find it. And so that's all fine, but all of that is a fantasy, because the world is made of specifics. It's not made of generalities. As you experience, let's just talk about right now, because of course that's very explicit. What you're experiencing right now is exactly what you happen to be experiencing in this instant. You happen to see exactly the light patterns that happen to be appearing. You happen to be hearing exactly the sounds that happen to be appearing. You happen to be experiencing exactly the thought that happens to be appearing. You happen to be experiencing exactly the sense of touch that happens to be appearing. Precisely, very, 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 very specifically. And the next instant, it's all shifted. You know, the specifics. So that's what reality is made of. Now, approximations are generalities, and they are not the specifics. Your experience is not made of generalities, it's made of specifics. So if you orient, and the problem with interpretations is their generalities. So if you orient to your life as being in terms of generalities, there's an element of inaccuracy which is crept in. And for many purposes, that's fine. But for purposes of understanding what you are and what this is, it's a real problem, especially in terms of self-identity, in terms of self-image, in terms of thinking of oneself as a limited individual separate from something, and so on and so forth. All of these beliefs are based on sloppy approximations that are not true, they're not accurate.
In my life, you know, my interpretations are vastly, you know, wrong. They're not slightly wrong, they're vastly wrong.
Yeah, sure, of course.
So in that case, approximation is not good enough.
Yeah, exactly.
But it seems like the more precise the approximation is, the worse it is, because the facsimile then traps us into thinking we've got a more solid reality.
It's an issue, and that's why unresolvability is so powerful and so important, because it shows you that no matter how close your approximation is, it's always wrong. You can't make it closer and closer and closer and then get to the real thing. You make it closer and closer and closer and closer, and it's wrong.
Yeah.
And you make it 1 billion times closer than that, and it's wrong. And you make it, you know, a squadillion times more precise than that, and it's wrong. Because what is here is not approximatable. It cannot be done. So a myth is as good as a mile.
Project we get invested in, when we've invested so much work in perfecting our approximation, that it's like, no way I'm going to give up this thing.
That's the challenge of yoga.
Yeah.
It's exactly the challenge of yoga.
So when you see it's unresolvable, then you just give up trying.
Well, you may the mind may continue going on with its interpretations. That's fine, but they lose their power to the degree you recognize that, because you can see that the interpretations necessarily deviate from actuality. In other words, they're wrong. So whatever you think is not true. And really seeing the truth of that is very powerful. because it doesn't stop thinking, but it frees you from thinking what you think matters. So you sit there and think, oh, gosh, you think something about yourself, or you think something about your life, or you think something about the world, and you don't give a shit because it's just a thought and it's not true. So you're not bound by it, you're not bound by the implications. This is powerful in terms of psychology, in terms of self-image things, and how we unconsciously define ourselves, and how we define our lives and our relationships to our lives and the world and relationships to others. All of that stuff just goes up the flue when you see the truth of unresolvability. It's not that it ceases to exist. The mind may continue with its habitual self-definitions and self-loathing and so on and so forth, but it loses its thing because it's just a crazy, it's the ramblings of insanity.
So in it's like that sense of without that solution, there's no resolution, there's no solution to something.
Right, exactly.
And with no solution, then there isn't a problem.
Right. The whole thing collapses. The whole thing collapses.
But like that metaphor, the matrix is so great because, it's like the matrix doesn't go away. It's just in the end, the guy can fly around it. He basically has freedom within he's not trapped by it. He's not trapped by the mind's patterns of interpretation.
Sure.
I mean, it's a great metaphor for the 21st century.
Sure. I'm sorry, just to go back to that. The Matrix doesn't go nearly far enough.
Oh, no.
Because in the Matrix, he discovered he wasn't in that life, but what he was in the life he was in was actually similar to that life, just with different parameters.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas what's going on here is much more fundamentally divergent than that. What's actually going on here, what you actually are, is inconceivably beyond and different than what the Matrix version of your interpretation would imply.
Right.
It's not like you're still basically the same, but in a different context.
Right.
You're not even a human being. You're not even in space and
That
time.
would be great if it conceptualized in a movie. Like this just, wave of light or something. I don't know.
I'm sorry.
Even what we experience is not precise.
Exactly, that's the point. When you see that experience is not precise, then your thoughts about it will have, if they pretend to be precise, they're a lie. It's not true. When you see the experience is not precise, experience is unresolvable. That's what I mean by unresolvable. It's not precise. It's fuzzy, it's divergent. There's too much information to pull together into a coherent whole. And when you see that, then how can thought claim that this is this and that's that, and they have a certain relationship that you know about, when experientially you can't tell what anything is? How can you say that the way this is and the way that is, or what their relationship is? It's trying to get specific with sloppy information.
An experience is also, initially, I don't know. But there's an interpretation over experience, typically, unless, what has happened when there's an experience, something is occurring? Isn't there typically some kind of a filter that I'm seeing my experience through?
No, never through. There may be a filter and there may be an interpretive framework, but your experience is always seen directly and purely.
Okay.
The filter exists over here. It claims to be through. It claims to own the experience, but it doesn't actually. It's a lie.
So the experience is always clear?
Always. Experience, this is what makes yoga easy. This is a great opportunity and a great advantage for the yogi, is the fact that reality is always completely, clearly and nakedly displayed and revealed. It's entirely not hidden.
So So here's the experience. Just, okay, I guess that's the end of that.
And even the interpretation or interpretive framework is itself just an experience. It's just experience. It's pretending, it's calling itself an interpretation, and it's claiming to be true, but all of that is itself experience. Now, the way that interpretations have so much power, and the way they seem to turn into overlays, is through the mechanism of hypnosis. Basically, the mind is very eager to simulate any suggestion that's put before it. And these interpretive frameworks are the essence of suggestions. So the interpretation comes along and says, I'm a separate human being and I'm incarnated in this body. And at the edge of this body, I stop and the world begins, which is not me. That's a thought. But the mind says, oh, okay, yes, boss. And bang, it simulates it, and all of a sudden it feels like that. Now, we're all very familiar with this mechanism. You go to a movie, and the movie is just patterns of light on a screen. But you go see a tearjerker, you get a little weepy. You go see a horror movie, and you jump when the monster comes out of the closet or whatever. And so how does that happen? Exactly the same mechanism. The mind is like a hypnotic sponge or something. You give the mind, just wave a little bit of a suggestion in front of the mind seizes on it and simulates it as if it was so, and generates a virtual somatic feeling that it is like that. And this is the essence of entrapment, the essence of stuckness, the essence of all problems. So, but the hypnosis is based on interpretations, and interpretations are based on the fantasy of resolvability. When you see there's no resolvability, you've taken something out of the chain and the whole thing collapses. Mind you, it may take a while to collapse, because if you've had a lifetime of programming yourself and hypnotizing yourself, then there may be a certain momentum there that may need to seem to play itself out.
Well, a fading is being recognized.
Yeah, that's typically, that's very typical how it looks.
Yeah.
Things become, all of that mechanism may still exist, but it becomes more ghostly and just less urgent.
Yeah.
Less relevant.
Less believable.
Yeah. You know, the ego stays around, and there's emotional reactivity, and there's all the mechanisms of personality and habit and all that. But it all just sort of, all that's there, and it kind of does its thing, reaction to stimuli and stuff. But it's all kind of like sort of in the background, and who gives a shit? It's just sort of more quirky.
Well, a lot of that seems to be fading as well.
Sure, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Maybe alternative, just pure light. Let's go poof. Pure vanilla.
Yeah, no.
Hey, more power to you.
No, coffee. No, this is really great. I am understanding this moment how experience simply is.
Experience simply is. Period. And everything and anything that seems to be included in that, and all apparent subsystems and all that, are actually just experience simply is. Period. And seeing that, really seeing that self-verifyingly true, is what yogic achievement is. That's what realization is. And delusion, the fabled delusion, is not seeing that. But it's always true, whether you see it or not. I mean, that's the good news. The bad news is not seeing it can result in an infinite degree of being caught up in virtual hypnotic hells. But the good news there is none of that is actual. You just experience it as if it was.
Well, you said a couple minutes ago, reality is not hidden.
Yes.
So there's no, so like when there's this idea of looking for the wow factor, I mean, the wow factor is always here. Right?
Yes.
So that's maybe just a trick to get you onto it, but,
Well,
but it's really, everything is wow, right?
Yes, but the trick is to recognize that. Seeing it is, recognizing it is, I mean, the fact that it is that is true. And if you know that fact, then you are living that fact in the sense that it feels that way. You wake up in the morning and you go, wow, and you get out of bed and you go, wow, and you wake up and you go, wow.
Your toe, go, wow.
Yeah, really, for real. But or you may, so knowing that philosophically versus knowing it, somatically, knowing it, feeling the truth of that, living the truth of that.
It
Not
seems as if that's available anytime.
absolutely,
Just let
always
it-
available.
But the only time, but I've noticed it's only kind of in my mind when I think, well, yeah, but I wasn't like in the past, like 2 seconds ago, it wasn't there or something, or 5 minutes. Well, but in the now, it's always there.
Yeah, and since the now alone exists, you're fine.
Right.
So the past, 2 minutes in the past can always be hell,
Yeah.
but who gives a shit because it doesn't
You're
exist.
thinking about it.
You're not there, you're here. Boy, life really sucked a minute ago. Thank God it's perfect now.
Well, everything you said didn't accumulate anywhere. So anything interpretation, even on what you're talking about, I can't resolve even what you're saying.
No, of course
And
not.
it really doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter, and there is great power and joy in seeing that fact.
And yet, how do I say this? There's something biochemical that feels to be happening, listening, being here all these years, that seems to, I don't know, clumsy words, assist in the fading of what's not real.
Sure, you're in yoga.
Okay. Whatever that is. Whatever
Whatever
that
it is.
Yeah, I mean, because that is a felt sense that.
Yes.
Yoga.
Yoga is a felt sense. Yoga is not theoretical. Yoga is completely pragmatic. Yoga is something that you do, not something that you think about.
Okay.
I mean, you can think about it all you want, but that's not yoga.
It's
And by
an
do, I mean experience.
Right, okay, that's engage with.
Yeah, experience is engagement.
Yeah.
How has all this wisdom affected your day-to-day life?
I'm sorry?
How has all this wisdom affected your day-to-day life?
Well, enormously, in one sense. In another sense, not at all. I mean, I still have fights with my wife. I still have days that, I just say, oh, I don't feel like getting out of bed today. Oh, shit, I have to go do something, whatever. So all of that happens. The mechanisms of personality continues. I'm still me doing what I do, just like I always was. But none of that has any importance. So there's a freedom, even though the event occurs, there's a freedom from it having any urgency or any weight to it or any sense that it matters at all. In a certain sense, in a very profound sense, it's just not caring at all.
No.
Not caring at all. Yeah.
So lack of attachment.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, sure. I mean, I hate to put it in those terms just because there's so much spiritual garbage associated with that terminology. But sure, that's what that refers to.
So the way you react to those incidents is totally different. Because you said you don't care about those.
Yeah. I mean, there may be reactions that are typical of my personality, but I don't care about the reactions. So it's not like needing to be neutral or needing to be, somehow having no personality and walking around like a zombie or something. But it's the fact that the personality is the way it is not felt as anything that's at all bad. It's interesting. It's quirky. Life is very, very interesting.
What's been most liberating for me in this whole is that falling away of needing to be better.
Yeah.
That has been huge.
Yeah. It is, sure.
needing to be
I mean, there's all these psychological mechanisms of self-torment. You know, it's assessing that one is inadequate and needing to be better, and assessing that one is not achieved and needing to achieve, assessing that one is not as loved and needing to be loved. I mean, it's like, you know, we're all familiar with the endless perversions of neuroses.
And the projection of that into society, that to change the world and
Sure.
fix things.
And probably accepting or expecting same of the other people.
Sure.
Right? Have to be more compassionate.
Sure, yeah.
So Peter, could you talk a little bit about decisions?
Uh-huh.
Or seemingly needing to make decisions,
Uh-huh.
choices, or how one can allow that to unfold, yet not try to make something happen or change something or saying what's wrong, so I need to go do this. How does that work for you?
You don't need to second guess your own process. When you make decisions, you do it the way you do it. And it doesn't need to be different. You may be indecisive and you may argue with yourself. I mean, whatever happens may happen, but sooner or later, you make whatever decision you make, and all that's fine. It doesn't need to be different than that. The only problem with decision is second guessing your own process and trying to steer that. And even if you do that, that itself is just part of your process. So it kind of always collapses into itself. And just let go of that mattering. When you need to make a decision, you do it the way you do it, or not. Maybe you're a person who can't make decisions. Okay, if that's how it is, okay, cool. So that's what happens. But it's actually not any different than it ever was. It's just a matter of not pretending you're up in the spectator stance, looking at it, judging it, or trying to improve it, or anything else. And yet, paradoxically, when you just let the process be what it is, it may tend to settle into more efficiency or more directness.
Thank you.
Sure. I mean, again, typically the problem with decisions is over-interpreting. You're interpreting what the conditions are, and you're interpreting what might happen, and this alternative and that alternative, and interpreting which choices then lead to what alternative, and all that stuff just exists in your imagination. So it's hopelessly complicating your experience of something with things that are really not true. Because whatever you expect to happen, what actually happens will be different than that.
Exactly.
Even if it's describable in the same words, the specific event of your experience of the result will be surprising and unexpected.
And so under those circumstances, then it's not really possible to make a decision, because it feels like no matter what I think will happen, there will be something entirely different I haven't thought of, and I can't take in all of the.
Sure, but you make the decision anyway, because decision, we only pretend that decision making is a rational process. In actual fact, decision making is just like eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
Yeah.
You decide what you decide, and the reason you decided it is because you decided that.
Yeah.
Because it's your nature to have decided that. And you know that it was your nature to decide that after the fact, because that's what you decided.
Like a foot going out of bed.
Yeah, sure. Should I put my left foot or my right foot down for such? Oh my God, let me think about it.
I try to figure that out when I'm gonna lay on my right side or left side after I turn off the light after reading.
I hope you don't put too much effort into
I
that debate.
don't, I've given it up. It just happens.
Wise.
It just happens. It's so amazing. It's just happening.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, somebody would say, because like as you were saying, well, I'm arguing with my wife, or I hate getting out of bed, or, so some people could say, well, what does that have to do with anything? There's a lot of jerks like that, people might say. What is the distinction? And those idiots don't care. What is the distinction? Because I've heard people say this.
What distinction between what and what?
If you say, well, what you said earlier about having an argument with my wife,
Right, all that,
kicking
yeah.
the dog, or,
Right. So what's the distinction between that and what?
and then just, some jerk in life who doesn't give a crap about what he does or how he acts.
There's no distinction. The only distinction, as always in yoga, is seeing what it is, seeing what it actually is, knowing what it actually is. It's not what you do. It's knowing what it is, actually. It's not about how you behave or don't behave. It's about what it is. There is no behavior. There is this. There is no not behaving. There's this. There's no good. There's this. There's no bad. There's this. There's no functionality. There's this. There's no dysfunctionality. There's this. And all of those qualifications are imaginary attempts to get a handle on something that is completely beyond saying what it is or how it is. And the only powerful point, the very essence of yoga, is to see what this is. Let this show you what it is. And when you know what this is, it happens that you'll be free of everything, because you'll discover there's nothing to be free of.
Yeah, this I get.
Well, that's all there is to get. And so then what's the difference between one guy kicking his dog and another guy kicking his dog? If one's a realized yogi, that's the difference. You have to call him Shri asshole instead of just asshole. And if he's really realized, you call him Shri asshole.
You said something about the behaviors, because most of us are familiar with these like enlightened guys who have really poor behaviors, sexual acting out, blah 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 blah. And I guess that they're still
People that complain about that are just jealous.
But it's not about the behaviors. Yeah, I'll have to really let that soak in, because
And I'll ask you right now, why is it not about the behaviors? On the basis of what I've been talking about today. That's a question you can answer.
it would be about.
No, it's not about the behaviors, because behaviors aren't behaviors. Behaviors are this. And interpreting that behaviors are behaviors is interpreted into existence in one's fantasy. So that behaviors are behaviors is already a fantasy. And that behaviors are good and bad is a fantasy. And that behaviors should be different than they are is a fantasy. And the way the behaviors should be is a fantasy. So the entire thing is just someone's delusion. You may have a fantasy that we should be sitting on the roof now, and be really critical of everyone for not sitting on the roof, and that's fine. You're free to have that fantasy. But it's just a fantasy, so we get this shit.
So the fact is that life is completely inclusive, and that includes all the things we don't like, all the things we like.
Yeah.
Mass starvation, mass war,
All that.
a comet blowing the whole solar system apart. I mean, it's all inclusive.
Right. But none of those things are actually things, and none of them are the things that we label them as being the implications of the way we label them.
So it's a picture of how a spiritual teacher should act. Or
Yeah,
it's the
it would
picture.
be your picture, which you generated in your imagination, or you had it passed along from someone else's imagination to yours. But says who? Who made you the authority on what the spiritual teacher is supposed to do?
That I can grasp. It's the picture of how. Yeah.
Interpretations are always pictures. They're always imaginary pictures. And the picture always deviates from the actuality. Always. And a myth is as good as a mile in terms of deviation.
Yeah, so the whole thing, I'm just realizing, is a misinterpretation.
Yes.
The whole thing. The not mattering has a whole different meaning.
Yes. It's not a not mattering of shallowness or of meanness or of dismissiveness.
Yes.
It's a not mattering because it doesn't actually matter.
Yes, no, I just. Wow. And that is a huge distinction.
And it's huge. But always look for yourself, see for yourself. See what is here and see the way it is, and you will discover all this for yourself. It's very clear.
One more example of the programming. It's just incredible. I mean, it's just so pervasive. Things should matter. Things should matter to us.
And mattering and not mattering is more interpretation. I mean, what does not matter really mean? Find out for yourself.
Well, when there's no meaning, there's no matter, no reason to make it matter.
It's no meaning, but it's not meaningless.
Yeah.
It's infinitely rich with profundity, but there's no particular meaning. There's no like, it means this or it means that. In a way, you can say it's a pure meaning, but it's a meaning that is irrational. The meaning that's a meaning of the life force itself.
Would you say significance would be a better word, or meaning?
In which context? This is absolutely significant, and this is absolutely meaningful, but not in human terms.
Mm-hmm.
Not what humans would consider meaningful or significant. But all human terms are defined into existence badly, so that's no surprise.
Is there anything else you can say about that innate intelligence? Aspects of it?
The inherent intelligence is what does everything. The inherent intelligence is the structure of everything. The inherent intelligence is the inconceivable interrelationship of everything. The inherent intelligence does atomic structure. It does DNA. It does everything. And it is inherent in actuality itself and permeates actuality. So all apparent circumstance is the expression of the inherent intelligence as a unified whole. Maybe unified is the wrong implication, as an inclusive whole, let's say.
So. It's a question. In the absolute, we can't get away from duality, but my question is, in the absolute, does this intelligence stand alone, or is there something else?
No, the intelligence is the absolute.
Okay, that's
The absolute does not have parts or components.
right.
It includes itself.
But it's
And when we
just-
can talk about it as being pure intelligence or pure being and, pure consciousness and all that, but that doesn't mean there's some consciousness which exists as a separate thing from some intelligence which exists as a separate thing. Those are just ways of partializing this which is not partialized.
Right.
As a way of pointing out some of its apparent seeming potencies.
So it's just,
And it's inherent because it's the very nature of what this is, that it happens to be that.
It's without a cause.
Yes. Or if you want to get fanciful, you can say it's its own cause. Which is a lot of fun to play with.
And there's no separation because
No separation.
yeah, so here.
This is an inclusive continuum, an inclusive infinite continuum.
And that's the meaning of not two.
Yeah.
Right, which is also not one.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, instead of saying not two or not one, you should just say not anything in particular.
That's beautiful.
Because again, anything that you can say it is, or even that it isn't, is talking about it in terms of partializing it. One is only one, and two is only two relative to some non-one or some non-two, and nothing like that can be found. So it's absolutely inclusive. It includes all numbers, and yet it is not any of the numbers. It's not, it includes and does all structure, and yet it's completely astructural. It's a very peculiar thing, this actuality.
Because I know you've spoken on the videos of where we were talking to their innate ignorant intelligence. It's not partialized, it's
Right.
that's so.
Even more significant than unresolvability to me is my audacity to think that I can cause things.
Sure.
I mean, that's even a rougher, gross error to start with, than thinking that I can end up with this.
Well, it's a reasonable mistake though, because what you are does participate in event. So it may feel like a cause, but then again, if you look and trying to be precise that it actually is you causing something, you can't find that. But it does, experience feels participatory. It's not just an inert mechanical event. It is pregnant with subjectivity and a sense of participation in itself, which of course we experience personally. So I would say understandable to think in those terms, because it feels like that, even if that's a oversimplification.
So in other words, we're always doing,
Yeah,
but we're actually not ever creating because there's no object that's being created as a result of the doing.
right.
There's no noun.
Right.
It's all just verb.
Sure.
And then we create illusions of nouns, kind of like, oh, look what I just did.
Sure.
And I mean, maybe it's a byproduct, I don't know, but then we claim it or whatever. And
And there may not be verb too, but that's fine. It's a fine provisional way to approach it.
yeah, but that's the next step, which is a good one because that leaves it unresolvable.
I'm good with verbiage for now.
Sure, that's fine. But it's a big step, you know, if you can see there's no things, then that's a big step. That's very good. And because that will enable you to see why there's no thing, the way in which there's no thing. And once you can see that, ultimately you will see everything. I mean, that's one of the nice things about yoga, is that all you have to do is engage with this directly, and that's the entirety of yoga. That's the entire path of it. It does all the work. It does everything. So if you just touch this actuality with intelligence and engagement, and just that event solves all problems and eliminates all error and erases all illusion. It's not like you need to do it serially and take care of this and then take care of that and then take care of that. So in a black humorous kind of a way, the practice of yoga, of engaging with reality, is a lot like taking poison. It solves all your problems in one easy step.
I like the gradual fading thing. I'm glad I signed up for that.
Yeah, you'll bypass, just skip over the poison thing.
Yeah.
Well, you were thinking of the poison thing. I thought it was a beautiful image of the universe being so inclusive that when we turn, to face it, it includes us. It includes whatever we give it, whatever we bring to it, whatever craft we come up with. It's just going to be, it's kind of like, the image was almost like a parent that's always going to forgive and reabsorb.
Well, it reveals that, it displays that it's already included, which is the same thing, but it's a little less poetic than, you being included, although it has the same effect. Because in that absolute inclusiveness, that there is a you to be included or not, dissipates as relevant.
One thing that somehow I can't even put into words, but approaching my clients with a bit more compassion, because a part of the mind is going, how could you not want this? How could you not want this freedom? And I think what I've been missing in that is understanding what the fear has been for people. I mean,
also, more immediately, it's simply immaturity. People are like children. And you have to say, you're a child, how can you not want these wonderful joys of adulthood? And they don't know about it because they're a child. It's not appropriate, it's not ready. It couldn't happen because they'd have to be an adult in order to partake of that.
And it's true because most of my peeps are like in their 30s and they had very poor parenting.
Who didn't, But, it's useful to think of individuals in terms of their development or their degree of unfoldment. And it's not just appropriate, but it's essential for them to be exactly where they are. That is their cutting edge. That's their path is for them to be them exactly the way they are at this instant. a 2-year-old, it's its job to be a 2-year-old. It's not, you don't criticize a 2-year-old for being 2 and not being 15. It's insanity. A 2-year-old's job is to be a 2-year-old. And this applies to everyone's individual nature. So someone's job, their entire functioning and engagement is to be where they are, to be, at the level of unfoldment that they are, and that is their most efficient path.
So that ties into not wanting to change somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, who are we to judge? Who are we to offer?
It can't happen.
No, I mean, we're just gonna butt our heads against it if we try.
People are where they are, and they can't be forced to be elsewhere. And on the other hand, some people may have a surprising potency to suddenly be elsewhere, but if so, that's who they are.
Right.
And you can't contrive that.
Right.
So,
And you might get it from being pushed by you.
Absolutely.
And but the nature of freedom is that they're what they are.
Exactly.
They interpret, their interpretation is what it is.
Yes. You being what you are is the essence of freedom. The universe in its absolute freedom has made you exactly what you are, exactly the way you are. And that's with incredible precision and purposefulness. Even though it's inconceivable in terms of trying to sort it out or figure out what's going on, if anything. I kind of feel like that might be a good note to end on. So please remember what all of this is about, all of this, incredible, getting into the details of all this, is a simple fact that this actuality is real, is actual, it alone exists, and this is the absolute reality right here. And it's not what you think it is. You're free to investigate what it is, and as you investigate what it is, you'll discover that what you think it is not true, and you become free of that misinterpretation. So it's actually very, very simple in essence. So that's it. Thank you very much for coming.